If you're facing grief, loss, death, or the heartbreak of divorce, I want to help you find some hope and some healing, even in life's hardest seasons. I'm going to share 4 of the biggest lessons I've learned, not only from my own life, but also from almost a decade as an Episcopal priest, walking with people through hospice and heartbreak, through painful endings, but also new beginnings. In this video, we're going to look at one surprisingly common mistake that can keep you stuck in your grief instead of moving forward, and what you can do instead. Then we'll explore the unexpected opportunities these painful seasons can bring. We'll dig into one of the most commonly overlooked sources of support for true healing and real growth. And finally, we'll wrestle with how you might begin to find a little hope, even in the hardest chapters of your life. So let's jump into it. First, one of the most common mistakes I've seen is that when people are in crisis, so many of us try to jump past the grief. Instead, you need to give yourself permission to feel the loss, to name what's hard, to allow yourself to cry or admit that you're angry or disappointed or scared or overwhelmed. I've sat with more people than I can count whose lives feel like they're falling apart, and almost every time there's this temptation to slap on a silver lining, to ignore the pain, to force gratitude, or to try to smile so that we don't have to feel the discomfort. But as one of my friends likes to say, you can't heal from something that you won't let yourself feel. Henry Nouwen, a great pastor and theologian, once wrote, "To mourn your losses is not to live in the past, but it's to live facing the future." Several years ago, a woman I know moved across the country for what was supposed to be a dream job, a corner office, a big title, everything she'd worked so hard for. But within 6 months, her boss changed, her responsibilities shifted, and the job turned into something she never would have accepted. At first, she tried to force gratitude. She'd say, "At least I have a paycheck, at least I'm not sick." But that only made her feel more alone. It made her feel like a crazy person, because she knew she was really upset, but she wouldn't admit it to anyone, not even herself. But one afternoon, she went home and let herself finally grieve, really grieve. She named what she'd lost, the hope of a mentorship, the spark of a calling, even the little coffee shop that she'd loved and left behind when she moved for this job. She called a friend. She talked for over an hour and sobbed about how sad and disappointed she was. The next day, strangely, she started to notice small opportunities to heal, to grow. She found different colleagues to lean on, new projects she was excited about, even the quiet courage to imagine something better, and eventually to leave this job and step into something better. Because sometimes it's only after you've named what's gone, after we've named what we've lost, that we can start to see what might still be waiting for us. It's like that assurance from Psalm 126. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Notice the Bible doesn't promise joy instead of tears, but it promises joy because of what was sown in tears. We have to go through the tears first. We have to go through the pain first. But right there in the sorrow, in the messy middle of that grief, that's where God can start to grow something new in your life. So we have to give ourselves space to grieve. So what have you lost? Maybe right now say it out loud, write it down, let yourself cry. Because that's not weakness, that's how your heart starts to heal from your grief. That's how your heart starts to make room for whatever God has in store for you next. Second, I've learned that life's big changes often strip away the old identities and give you the opportunity to discover who you really are and what you really value. These moments have a way of stripping away old roles and identities and pushing us to wrestle with questions we might have avoided for years. Questions like, who am I if I've left a job that was central to my identity? What matters most if I'm living far from my family for the first time? Where's my real security if it's not in a paycheck or a house or another person? Psychologists tell us that big changes like this often trigger something called identity renegotiation. When the old roles that in your mind have defined who you are, like being a spouse, a parent with kids at home, a dependable provider, when they get stripped away, you suddenly have the opportunity to ask deeper questions. Who am I really? What's actually at the core of me? This can be uncomfortable, it can feel awkward, it can make us feel very uncertain of ourselves. But letting yourself sit with those questions instead of rushing to fill the gap, that's often when something new starts to grow. So what might that look like in a practical way? It could mean journaling. Journaling about your fears and hopes, or talking with a friend or a therapist about what's really going on inside you. It could be as simple as sitting quietly each morning and asking yourself, who am I right now? And then simply noticing what bubbles up in your mind and your soul without trying to fix anything or force any answer. It might be uncomfortable to do this, but on the other side, you often find deeper priorities, a truer sense of what really matters to you, and a clear understanding of your own identity. You may remember in the book of Genesis, there's this story about Jacob. He's on the run, haunted by his past, terrified of his future. He's about to meet his brother Esau, who last Jacob heard wanted to kill him. And in the middle of the night, by a river, Jacob is left alone. And that's when someone, a man, an angel, maybe even God himself, comes and starts to wrestle with Jacob. They struggle all night long until finally at daybreak, the figure says, "Let me go." But Jacob holds on and says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he gets his blessing, but also a new name, Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. Jacob walks away from this encounter with a limp that will stay with him for the rest of his life. I love this story because it's so raw, so human. Isn't that exactly the way these big transitions can feel like for us? We're left alone with the questions that scare us most. We wrestle maybe in the dark of the night, maybe literally when we can't sleep, with God, with ourselves, with who we truly are underneath all those old identities and shallow roles. We wrestle with the shape of our future and who we'll become when the dust finally settles. And we might come out of these experiences changed, limping, but we also might come out with a new name, a deeper sense of who we really are, what actually matters, what our identity is. Because it's only when the old supports get kicked out that we start to discover what's actually holding us up. A few years ago, a friend of mine sent her youngest off to college, and almost overnight, the house went quiet in a way she wasn't prepared for. And it wasn't just the silence, it was the question that settled in all that empty space. Who am I now if I'm not needed by my children in every moment and at every turn? At first, my friend didn't want to contend with any of the deeper questions. She didn't want to think about it. So she simply tried to fill the void. She joined a book club, she started volunteering, she signed up for a pottery class just for the mess of it. On the surface, it looked like she was doing fine, maybe even great. But over coffee one afternoon, she admitted she'd been waking up at 3 every morning, heart racing, feeling like she was about to fall off some invisible ledge. It took months of small, awkward steps for her to start answering that deeper question of who she was outside everyone else's needs and expectations. She began journaling every morning, pouring out everything she was afraid of losing and everything she hoped might still be ahead. She let herself sit in the quiet instead of rushing to fill it, sometimes with tears, often with uncertainty and fear. She opened up to her husband in a way she hadn't in years. And strangely, even though it was difficult and vulnerable, that season became one of the richest times of growth in her life. Her marriage found a new rhythm. She grew gentler with herself. She started noticing small joys, things she'd been far too busy to see before. She didn't experience some dramatic transformational moment, no lightning bolt of clarity, just a quiet, steady remaking as she learned about herself and her priorities, and she became both softer and stronger. Because that's so often how it goes for all of us. When life strips away the old identities, it gives us the painful but also the precious opportunity to discover who we really are underneath it all. Third, One of the most important things that I've learned about going through the darkest seasons of our lives is that you need to have the support of a loving community around you. You're not meant to walk through this alone. Because even when everything else is shifting, we still need people who are constant and stable in our lives. People who remember who we were and help us become who we're meant to be. People are meant to face stress and big challenges together. Research has shown actually that when we go through hard things with someone else by our side, our brains and bodies relax more. Relationships are not just nice to have, they're part of how we're wired to survive. So yes, you might be strong enough to stand alone, but you were never meant to. Because it's the people who know your story, who've walked with you through old seasons, who've carried the memory of who you've been, they're the ones who can help steady you as you become someone new. And I can tell you from my experience, the church at its very best is meant to be this kind of steady community. A community that stands beside you and says, we've been there. You're not alone. We're walking with you. You don't have to journey through this by yourself. The book of Ecclesiastes contains this wisdom and says it so well. Two are better than one. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. You see, we're meant to have people who will support us when our lives have fallen apart. Life was never meant to be tackled solo. Not the work, not the joy, and certainly not the heartache or pain. So find your people who will walk with you. And then, when you can, be that person to walk with someone else who's going through a challenging chapter. Fourth, I've learned that we have good reason to hope that one day we will look back and see the growth we experienced in our most difficult seasons. People, of course, talk about this all the time. They point out that butterflies only become strong enough to fly because they first have to go through the struggle of breaking free from their cocoons. Anyone who works out at the gym will tell you that pain or at least discomfort is a prerequisite for growth. However, the real challenge is that while growth can come out of life's hardest chapters, it almost never shows up right when we want it to. In the middle of our most difficult seasons, all we may see is the mess. It's generally only much later that we can look back and begin to understand how we were growing. I've walked alongside people through bankruptcy, through the shock of serious diagnoses or being laid off from jobs they thought they'd retired from, and I often find that long after people have gone through these chapters, a season that was agonizing or an experience that they'd never wish even on their worst enemies, long afterwards, they also realize that their experience shaped them into someone who they're grateful to have become. They've grown more compassionate, more present, maybe even a little wiser because of what they've walked through. One of my friends likes to say, be patient with the becoming. Because growth rarely looks like progress in the middle of the chaos and pain. It often feels like we're just surviving or stumbling around in the dark. But we may be slowly changing into someone who's stronger or wiser or kinder without even realizing what we're becoming. So be patient with the becoming. It turns out that there's even neuroscience behind this. Studies have shown that our brains are wired to make sense of our stories after the fact. It's almost like we can never see the whole picture while our story's unfolding. It's like we're too close to it. It's only later looking back that the pattern emerges and we can say, oh, there was good that came out of it. That's how I grew in that season. About a decade ago, a man I know watched his whole life unravel in just a year. His wife died suddenly, leaving him with 2 young kids. Then his business collapsed and he had to sell the house where he and his wife had once dreamed of a future. He moved with the kids into a small place, the kids sharing a bedroom and my friend sleeping on the old guest bed. But there, he started a simple ritual. Every Friday night, he'd make homemade pizza with the kids. They'd watch a movie on the floor, and then they would each share one good thing from the week. At first, it was just a way to give his kids something steady to hold on to. But over time, those messy little Fridays became a lifeline, grounding them, helping them find small joys even in the middle of so much loss. Years later, my friend told me I'd never choose that pain of losing my wife, having my company fall apart, but somehow, it also made me gentler, more present, a better dad, a better person. And isn't that so often the way it works for us? Meaning almost never shows up in the middle of a chaos. It comes later, looking backward. That's when you can see the shape of your life story. So if you're in a season that feels like life is unraveling, hold on and trust that one day you might look back on all this and see something taking shape that may have some beauty to it, even in the midst of the pain. Before you go, let me leave you with 4 small practical things you can try this week if you're in the middle of one of these difficult times of transition. First, don't make the mistake of rushing past the grief or whatever's hard. Let yourself name it, mourn it, grieve it, cry. After all, those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Second, wrestle with the big questions. Who am I? What actually matters to me? Take the opportunity to discover who you really are. Third, reach out to one person who can walk with you. Make a phone call, send a text, schedule a coffee, but make sure you have the support of a loving community around you. Don't try to shoulder this alone. And fourth, hold on to the hope that you may one day look back and see growth and goodness that came out of even the most difficult seasons of your life. Be patient with the becoming. If this time together was meaningful for you, or if you want to keep exploring how to live faithfully right in the middle of real, messy, everyday life, go ahead and like this video or subscribe. It's the simplest way to make sure you see the next one. And if there's a topic you'd like for me to dive into, leave a comment below. I look forward to being with you again soon. God bless you.